The sponsor of this episode is Chadwell Supply, an OG in the multifamily industry. Chadwell is the largest privately owned maintenance and repair supplier, and they deliver orders the next day from local warehouses across the United States. To find out how Chadwell Supply will make your day better, visit www.chadwellsupply.com/difference.
Welcome to Beyond the Work, Tales in Multifamily Maintenance. My name is Chris Caramanica. As a 15-plus year veteran in the apartment industry, I have stories to tell, a desire to hear and tell others' stories. As a multiple committee member for NAA, a CAMT advisory board member and a CAMT holder, and a national presenter and educator, I have met and worked with so many great people in our industry at all different levels. This is not going to be a how-to podcast. This is going to be a How Did podcast. We are going to explore the how did tales in multifamily maintenance. How did we do it? How did we learn from it? How did we grow? How did we decide not to do it again? Join me as we go beyond the work.
BTW, the show must go on. Welcome to Beyond the Work, Tales in Multifamily Maintenance. As I was thinking about what I wanted to discuss on today's podcast, three words kept coming to mind: fire, flood, and blood. It's actually one of the reasons why I started this podcast to begin with. Today, I'm going to talk about three tales in multifamily maintenance, all that immediately came to mind when I first came up with the idea for this pod. You see, if you're not in our industry, you might not understand what fire, flood, and blood mean. Those three things are pretty much how we can classify any emergency, specifically emergency on-calls in our industry. My wife asked me to explain it a little bit more, so I thought I would for the listening audience, for people that might not be used to the term fire, flood, and blood. It's pretty self-explanatory, but let me go a little bit deeper. So, fire. Yes, there are actual fires that happen in our business. Recently, I had a dumpster fire at a property. But we also want to try to avoid things that can cause a fire, whether that's electrical in nature, or making sure that residents have properly working smoke detectors, something that can prevent a fire from happening or alert us in the case of a fire. Then you have flood. Pretty self-explanatory as well. When there's a flood at a property, or any kind of water damage, it's definitely an emergency. But what do we do as an industry to make sure that we're avoiding those floods from happening? That could be through preventative maintenance. It could be making sure that we're talking to our residents about properly flushing items down the toilet, or what items to not flush down their toilets. Then you have blood. My tale today about blood, I promise, is not going to be gory, though I have seen quite a few in my time. Blood is a catch-all. Could it be a death? Could it be a situation, a sharp object, or a piece of broken glass, or any situation on a site where it can actually cause physical harm to a resident? That's how we classify emergencies, and specifically our emergency on-calls at our property: fire, flood, and blood. So let's cover fire first. I'm going to take you back to my very first apartment maintenance job. I was a maintenance supervisor at a 100-unit property in East Rutherford, New Jersey. There was a time where I was on call 24/7, 365. And I'll never forget my first instance with fire. It was a Saturday afternoon. My wife and daughter and I had met with the rest of my family, and we were having a wonderful afternoon lunch, dinner for my grandmother, who was turning 80 years old. My cousins, aunts, and uncles had come from as far as Florida to have this lunch. It was great. It was a really great time. And then the call came. Many maintenance technicians have received these calls. Many maintenance professionals, property managers, anybody in industry has received a call during their family time, their off time, even when they're on call. That unexpected. That's what happened that day. Just as dessert was about to be served, my phone rang. It was our fire monitoring company. They were alerting me to an active fire at the property that I lived and was on call for. So without skipping a beat, I gave my grandmother a kiss. gave my mother and father a kiss, thanked all my relatives, and apologized for having to leave. Quickly scooped my 8-month-old daughter in the car along with my wife, and was at the property in about 35 minutes. I showed up, and this was my first fire. First time I'd had to deal with the local police department. First time I had to deal with the local fire department. First time I had met any of them. I was only on the job for about 2 months when this happened. I showed up, I parked my car, walked right into the front lobby. All of the residents had been pouring out. Thankfully, a lot of them had known me by this point. So I walked in and I turned off the fire alarm that was still blaring. That was my first mistake. Very quickly, the fire chief came running up to me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm the maintenance supervisor here. I'm turning off the fire alarm." And he looked at me and he said, "Son, if you turn off that fire alarm ever again, I will take you away from this building in silver bracelets." Now, as the son of a police officer, I knew exactly what that meant. I did not want to get arrested for doing my job, but nobody had trained me. Nobody had told me what to do in case of a fire. There was an alarm going off. It was loud and obnoxious. And I had known that I had the code to silence the alarm and turn it off. And what I didn't know, as many of you are shaking your head as you listen to this, and I'm shaking my head now, is that the only person that is allowed to shut off the fire alarm when there's an active fire alarm in your building is the fire department. So I apologized. I stepped away from the building and just kind of sat there with my tail between my legs. So here I was, the person responsible, not able to do anything. After about 15 minutes, that same fire chief that had threatened to throw me in jail came up to me and asked me, "Are you new?" He had never met me before. I'd only been there for a few months. And I said, "Yes." He didn't apologize for threatening to throw me in jail, but what he did explain to me was the importance of never turning off a fire alarm. That's a lesson that I'll never forget. He also took the time to explain to me what had happened. He also took the time to walk me to the scene. It was a small kitchen fire. There was a significant amount of damage done to the stove and the countertops as well as the upper cabinets. Thankfully, the resident wasn't home. They had left a pot on the stove and walked out, probably to walk their dog if memory serves. We walked through the situation. There was a sprinkler activation, hence the flood, but that's not my flood tale for today. And he was very nice he explained to me he basically was the first person to explain to me what my job was in the case of a fire. He wanted to make sure that there was clear communication between management, which I was, and the fire department. He also explained to me what questions the fire department would ask, what the police department would ask, what information I would need. He also was the first person to explain to me that I should probably get the insurance company out to look at the damages, in addition to getting the remediation company there to do all the wet work. He looked at me and said, "I get fires like this all the time. You should not have to spend hours vacuuming up water from your sprinkler." He was the first person that really explained to me what needed to be done. And I listened. I took notes. And I made sure it never happened again. I've taken those lessons away. That was my first fire. I've had more than my fair share, as many of you that are listening. I actually have some friends who are local, work in the local fire departments. And I have never forgotten those lessons, and I try to teach those to every new maintenance supervisor that comes on site. Make sure that they know what the emergency procedures are. I also try to make sure that they know exactly where all of their equipment, their safety equipment is. And the importance of things like an incident report. The importance of things like calling management, calling ownership. And of the utmost importance is making sure the residents that we serve are safe. So that's my tale on fire. Let me take you back for my next two tales, I'm going to take you back, way back 15 years, long before I ever actually, over 20 years, before I even got into what we now call the multifamily industry.
Chadwell Supply is the proud sponsor of the Multifamily Media Network. Chadwell Supply is the largest privately owned MRO supply company and is committed to the multifamily industry. They deliver orders the next day from local warehouses across the United States. Chadwell Supply offers valuable resources such as maintenance training, a dedicated renovations team, and procurement platform assistance, ensuring multifamily properties operate more efficiently. Partnering with Chadwell Supply helps communities stand out in an increasingly competitive market. Learn more at chadwellsupply.com/difference.
Now that we've covered the tale of fire, we're going to move on to the tale of flood. And to discuss the tale of flood, I need to take you back to 2001, when I was an assistant theater manager for Blue Man Group in New York City. You see, Blue Man Group in New York City is housed at the Astor Place Theater, which is located in the historic Colonnade Row, built by John Jacob Astor. It is a landmark building that's over almost 200 years old. For those of you that could see on video, Colonnade Row is the framed photo I have right here in my office. Beautiful building. What many people don't know is that directly above the auditorium and the stage for Blue Man Group in New York City is an apartment. And that's where my tale of flood comes in today. See, I was in the apartment industry long before I knew about the apartment industry. I helped manage that theater. My day-to-day was an 8 to 5. I would show up, look at the box office receipts from the previous day, help the site team make any repairs that needed to be made from last night's or the weekend's shows. I oversaw the concierges, as well as worked with the front of house staff. I'm proud to say I saw well over 50 performances of Blue Man Group. You see, when you're in a theater environment, when 5 o'clock rolls around, you don't go home. And I didn't. I was young and in my 20s, and had a really good time hanging out with the cast and crew, and made some lifelong friends. But there was one day in particular that I learned quite a bit about leadership and management and facilities, all in an afternoon. So for those of you that aren't real theater goers, you see, on Wednesday afternoons in New York City, whether it's off-Broadway or Broadway, there are 2 show days. 2 show days are Wednesdays and Saturdays. Usually you have a 2 p.m. matinee and a 8 p.m. evening performance. So I'll never forget this Wednesday afternoon. It was pretty routine, and we loaded 100 audience members into the house. And at the end of the show, at about 4 o'clock, we helped get 100 people out of the house. Pretty routine. But as people were leaving that day, it started to rain. Again, not unusual in New York City, especially that time of year. But then something happened. At about 5 o'clock, I received a call right at the end of my day. Now, I had planned on staying that night anyway. I usually stayed on 2 show days. It was electric. It was a lot of fun. But at around 5 o'clock, as I was sitting up in my office, somebody came over the radio. "We have water in the lobby." "What do you mean we have water in the lobby?" "I'll be right down." So I came down and I walked into this waterfall, unlike anything I'd ever seen. See, the rain had picked up. It went from a light storm to a very heavy storm very, very quickly. Water started pouring into the lobby right outside the main seating area at the Astor Place Theater. Now, I was surrounded by technicians, men covered in blue, and our diligent, hardworking front of house staff that dealt with all of our audience members that they would help load in and load out. But I was the assistant theater manager. I was the facilities guy who had never seen a flood. So quickly, I was able to figure out that the water was coming from above. Makes sense, right? Where else is water going to come from? It wasn't a pipe burst. The apartment directly above the theater had an outdoor balcony directly above the inner lobby. And there was some construction happening in that apartment. And the construction team members had accidentally clogged the drain, or so I thought at the time. Very quickly, I got down into the theater, and people were looking to me for direction. People that were much older at the time, and I didn't know what to do. But I snapped into action. First thing was stop the water. Well, I needed to figure out what to do. So while I was trying to figure out how to stop the water, I was helping divert the water. I instructed stagehands to grab me plastic bags and duct tape. Anything that I could to divert the water to a location that wasn't damaging thousands upon thousands of dollars of music equipment, shop equipment, as well as our system's water heaters and boiler. In the throes of that, people were looking to me for leadership, and I started barking orders. It was the first time I've ever barked orders in my entire life. I was 22 years old, and I'll be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. Do you see a common theme? Early in my career, like a lot of us, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was faking it until I made it. So that day, I had 30 people staring at me, some of them completely covered in blue, asking me what to do, asking me how they could help. And I started telling people to grab buckets, start grabbing whatever they could, and move materials out of the way to keep them safe. Now, it was 5 o'clock. We had a show at 8, which means we'd start letting people in at 7. There wasn't a lot of time. So, thankfully, Blue Man Group, for those of you who have seen, has an ample amount of ponchos. I was able to throw a poncho on, and some of our staff members were wise enough to throw them on as well to help with the cleanup as water was flooding and water falling into our lobby, doing damage to everything in the building. I navigated outside by myself, which I would never do again, and got up to that apartment balcony. I found the drain. The drain was broken. It was cracked. So there was the only thing that I could do was take all the garbage bags that I had been using to divert water and stuff them into the drain. Basically, stop the water from coming into the building will stop the flooding into the building. There's an old adage in theater: the show must go on. And it did. So after I got the water stopped, and I would say that took probably about 30 minutes from the first call to actually getting the water to stop. But the show must go on. So what did we do next? Well, thankfully, Blue Man Group is a very messy show for those of you that have seen it, and there was plenty of shop vacs. I was directing the entire staff of the Astor Place Theater to do whatever they could to mop up water, to wipe down anything that was dripping. See, I had gotten the water stops despite the fact that it was still raining. We also had plenty of floor mats. We were able to put floor mats on the floor so people wouldn't slip and would be safe. The show must go on. Very pleased to report that at approximately 7:30 that evening, we loaded people into a dry, safe environment, and they had no idea that 2 hours before, the entire lobby was flooded. I learned a lot about management that day. I learned a lot about myself that day. And I learned that even in the toughest, most difficult times, all you have to do is put your head down and work through it. Think about what is the next step. Slow down. Use your resources. I wasn't there by myself. I had a great team of over 30 people, some of them in blue, and we got the job done. It was a great show that night, and the drinks afterwards were even better. I really thank the team at Blue Man for everything they taught me in those early days. And it was the first time I'd ever dealt with a flood that was caused by an apartment, but it definitely wasn't my last. My next story about blood. This one, I promise, as I said earlier, won't be gory. This also happened at Blue Man Group, not too long after that flood story. Every day I would show up, and there was a very nice gentleman who lived in one of those 6 apartments, not the one above the theater, one of the adjacent ones. Very nice older gentleman. Talked to me every day. Let's call him Larry. Larry was one of the nicest people I had the pleasure to work with. See, working in the theater business, you only got to see people for very short amounts of time. People would come to the show and they would leave. That was the customer service we had to provide for their 2.5 hours with us. But for those 6 apartments, I had to provide something I never had to provide before in all my years in theater. Was a listening ear, was customer service for somebody that lived there just as much, if not more than I did. You see, Larry was an older gentleman, had no family, and I would talk to him every single day out in front of the building. It started with simple hellos. Then it grew. I learned a little bit more about him and his family or lack thereof. I learned that he was a war veteran, which held a special place in my heart. I also learned that he was a musician and an artist. He was a photographer and a reader. I learned all of this in a very short amount of time. Larry liked to talk, and as you can imagine, so did I. So Larry and I spent a lot of time together, until we didn't. Shortly after Thanksgiving, I realized I hadn't seen Larry in a few days. And I thought Larry had gone to see his family. It was right after Thanksgiving. In the theater business, we have shows over Thanksgiving. So not on Thanksgiving Day, but I didn't recall seeing him all that week, even though I had been there at the theater every single day. And I said to my boss at the time, has anybody seen Larry? And we asked around, we asked all of the people that worked in the theater, we asked his neighbors, and nobody had seen Larry. Well, unfortunately, I had my first experience with blood. See, I had to do something that I had never had to done before, but unfortunately I've had to do many times since. I had to do a wellness check. I had to knock on the door to Larry's apartment. I had to key myself in. Remember, I was young and I didn't know any better. I would definitely treat the situation much differently now than I did then. Unfortunately, I walked into the apartment and Larry had passed. Larry died of natural causes, but as the coroner would tell me later, he had died about a week prior. And that was a very difficult experience. It's something I still carry with me today. Many of you listening have had to deal with what we call an unattended death. It is probably one of the worst experiences that we can experience in this industry, especially when we're young, when you don't know any better. And I didn't know anything. See a common theme in some of my tales? But I paid Larry the tribute. I made sure to get in touch with what little family he had left. I helped pack up his belongings. I helped throw out some things of his and made sure the things that were worth keeping went to the right people. And then I had to make sure that Larry's apartment was ready for the next renter. I'll never forget Larry, because Larry taught me more about customer service than I had learned in all of my tutelage in my theater program that I was in college, or anything that I learned when I was in the theater business in all the years that I was in it. See, Larry was a resident. He was a person. All he needed was a listening ear. All he needed was a friend, and he needed somebody to look out for him. And I looked after Larry, even after his passing. Those are my 3 tales. Sorry to end on such a low note with the tale of Larry. But what I learned from that fire chief, what I learned from myself during the flood and how to manage that situation, and what I learned about the importance of getting to know and learn and talk to our residents, getting to know who they are as people, and to some degree, even the team members that I work with today. I learned from those 3 instances. I've taken them with me every single day, and I never forget about them. It's one of the many reasons why those 3 tales are what spurred me to create this podcast to begin with. Think about a time where you didn't know something. Close your eyes. Were you brave enough to ask the question? Or did you throw yourself headfirst into it, like I did in my fire and flood stories? Think about a time that you may have blown off a resident or just quickly walked past a team member that really could have used a listening ear. I try to keep those things in mind, and I hope you will too. Thank you for joining me for Tales and Beyond the Work, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Thank you for joining me for this episode. No matter how long you've been in our industry or what position you have at your company or your community, everyone has a maintenance story to tell. Go to www.multifamilymedianetwork.com and leave me a voice message or share your information, and we can tell your tale together on a future episode. Please check out our sponsors and like, subscribe, and follow to this podcast or video, and join the Multifamily Media News Network newsletter for upcoming shows and blogs from me and the other great hosts on our network. Our stories all connect us. See you for the next chapter.